Now let's take a look at what's happening in the commodities market. Now joining us is Clement Igbanugo, economist at Financial Derivatives Company. Join us right here in the studio. Great to have you for the second time this week. And the last time we spoke, I know oil prices were still below $100, talking about Brent. And this morning, it's back above 100 again. The volatility continues in that market. I want to see oil prices down for energy costs for that reason, even though I know, Nigeria needs that. We need that money. How are you seeing it?
Yeah, fine. Yes, last time we had that sentiment that the oil price will still bounce back. Of course, you know that the oil pricing for today is for October delivery, so right. It's future prices. So it is largely dominated by sentiment, speculations, and all that. Basically, there are four things that drive oil price. Demand supply conditions, but then you have the hedgers, the speculators, and then market sentiment. Now, you see that statement you made reference to the other time by the Saudi Arabian energy minister is still driving sentiment in the market, because now it's very clear that these guys, the OPEC plus, they can come together and say, we're not going to increase supply. And so people are now expecting that there could be a supply tightening. And of course, you also know that within the domestic market, there are still expectations that supply may not increase that much. And so you see the U.S. stockpile, based on the report released for last week, declined by about 0.4%. And that is actually giving investors that mindset that there could still be demand, supply tightening in the offing.
Right, and with that output tightening actually, coming into play.
Supply tightening,
yes. Supply tightening at this point. Yeah. I see also that Nigeria aims to raise an initial $10 billion in funding to implement its energy transition ahead of COP27. How are you seeing it?
Yeah, that's great news. I think a lot of great things happening these days because Nigeria really needs the energy transition. We'll take it two ways. One is energy. Number two is climate change. Now, for energy, of course, you know where we are. Since 2015, when the global community set the Sustainable Development Goal, the Goal 7 said we want to ensure that there is access to reliable and modern energy by all by the year 2030. And every global community, every country in the world committed to it. In fact, as at that time, the number of persons without access to electricity was estimated at 1.02 billion. As at now, it's below 733 million. But we have a different case in Nigeria. As at that time, number of persons without access to energy was 75 million, but today it's 95.9 million. So you see that Nigeria has a bigger problem with energy. But that on one side, in terms of climate change, is something that affects everybody in the world. It's about global warming. And Nigeria made a commitment. Of course, the Paris Agreement, which Nigeria signed to, and Nigeria submitted its nationally determined contribution to reduce carbon emission by 20% relative to 2015 level. And last year, they just upgraded it to 47% relative to 2018 level. But then, how do we finance it? Because the major issue with the climate change mitigation and adaptation is financing. And you remember the Prime Minister of Barbados at COP26
yes.
making that frantic call, because the big boys, the developed economies said, we're going to contribute, we're going to finance developing economies. We are setting aside $100 billion annually. But they kept reneging on that commitment. Because the truth is, China is contributing 29% of global carbon emission. USA 14% of global carbon emission. What is Nigeria contributing?
China remains the top. And
yeah, of course.
African countries have
10.5 gigatons of carbon emission. Nigeria is just 0.23. So if there will be climate justice, then there must be a financing from these people that are contributing much more. Because the problem is that the climate change is affecting everybody.
Right.
And so for Nigeria now to begin to make that move, we have a climate change law that was just last year, 2021, All right. So that move is a move in the right direction. $10 billion to start.
But what do you think
initial.
they'll be spending on?
Yeah, it has to be spent on energy transition, basically renewable energy, because you are now moving to modern energy. Now, basically, you see that we have about 4,000 megawatts supply of power, but that is majorly through methane gas, which is part of the fossil fuel issue we're talking about. So if we must move, if we must transit to clean energy, to save energy, then we must invest in renewable energy. And our investment in renewable energy is too far below the lines. And so we must step it up. Of course.
And with $10 billion, that's a step in the right direction.
A step in the right direction, because already they're looking at about $430 billion for that stretch, because committing to net carbon emission policy by 2060, you must have a commitment to achieve that. So for me, it's a step in the right direction.
Quite a lot of commitments, and we're seeing, Europe struggle.
Yeah, sure.
At this time, they've had to rely, go back to some dirty alternatives because of what they're going through with gas with Russia actually, cutting down supplies to Europe. And, the big boys have problems at this time. The big boys have contributed, more to what we're seeing, at this time. But what do you think is the right way for the big boys to actually make sure that they keep to this, agreement and, all the commitments that they've made?
Because
now we see Europe's hands are tied at this point, and
yes, you're very right. With the disruption that happened earlier this year,
right.
Europe is actually in a big mess. And of course, you see even Russia coming out and say, oh, we're going to suspend gas supply for some days and all that. All of this will keep happening. But energy transition takes a whole lot of lag. It takes a long time. You see the US signing the clean energy bill, the inflation reduction. And if you look at the inflation reduction act, it's about clean energy. It's about alternatives.
Some have called it the climate
of course, that's what it is. Because we are talking about the energy crisis. If we have those alternatives that are not dependent on oil, then it means we shouldn't be, the entire global community shouldn't be where they are today.
Should also help with reining in inflation.
Of course. Yeah. So what is spiking inflation is the energy crisis. The prices are skyrocketing. And today you think they're coming down. Tomorrow you see them again. And so you see that commitment must be there. But we in Africa, we in Nigeria, how do we key into that commitment? Financing becomes an issue. And that is why they will have to contribute. Of course, you look at what is happening to agriculture. Climate change is already here. But in Africa, you discover we don't have all of that commitment to climate change. Why? Because we cannot finance that transition because it's renewable energy is very costly.
And we're struggling with revenue at this time.
Struggling with revenue.
The federal government.
Oil price $101.4 today. We should be shouting Hosanna, more revenue, right? But remember, subsidy is biting.
Yep. The same old bites.
You see? So Nigeria needs to do much more to stay on course.
Step up. Another news there, I see that 4 major oil companies have agreed to end the U.S. lawsuits that they sought to enforce a multi-billion-dollar arbitration awards against Niger State's owned oil company. Shall we celebrate now?
For us, it's not a surprise. That lawsuit has started as early as 2011.
Right.
And about 4 of the IOCs are actually involved. Some started 2015, depending on when they entered into the fray. And it has been the NNPC at that time taking much more than they should from the oil production sharing contract. Now, but by the petroleum industry bill that was signed last year, there's this commitment that all of this fracas must be ended in 1 year. So we expect that they have to begin to come to the tables to make sure that this ends, in order to make sure that there's full implementation of the PIA. And of course, the last 10 days, they just completed the signing of the new agreement for the deep water production sharing contracts, and NNPC factored all of those concerns and all of that into all of that. So now they're saying we're going out of court, we want to go and settle, and from now to October, because that's the timeline they actually have, we expect that they will come to terms and settle out of court, because we really need to go into real business. Of course, we know there are shifts. here and there,
Right.
commitment to shift away from oil and that, but it can't happen overnight. And so we must have that commitment to ensure that the oil sector bounce. For the past 5 years, oil sector has been in recession.
For the past 5 years.
It has been in recession. And that's a big loss to us. So whatever that can be done to revamp that sector needs to be done. Whatever it takes to be done, it has to be done.
And also diversification, that would also really help at this point.
That's key, because it's the non-oil sector now that should carry the economy.
Exactly.
You know, when you look at the GDP, you discover that the non-oil sector is contributing more to the GDP, but not to revenue, not to export. So I think we need to do much more. Our problem is much more of structural constraints, all right? And so we need to do much more to non-oil export. We have a whole lot of policies here, and they're trying to restrict import. But if you look at countries that actually pursue the import restriction policy, it doesn't really work efficiently.
Right.
What works is import substitution policies.
Right.
If we have those industries here and empower them, you know, and enable them to be competitive, they will produce. Nobody goes out to buy if you can buy cheaper here. Why do you go to Dubai to buy if you have that quality here and it's cheaper here? All right? And then we'll now have the export promotion activities that are zeroed down to the localities, not in zonal, somewhere in Uma here for the southeast, and someone from my village does not even know that it has to be close to the people to mobilize all of those production activities and all of that. And then you see how we can actually improve on our non-oil export and non-oil revenue.
Quite interesting. Before I let you go now, you know, our railway has been under attack for a while now, and Nigeria is considering hiring private security to secure the railways. And I'm wondering, can we afford that?
Yes, we can afford that. For me, I think it's good news. I think the problem we have much more is that we are much more driven by government-led investment. In some clients, is the private sector. You have your PPP arrangement. They can design, build, finance, operate, and deliver at some point in time. All right? And so you can't build such infrastructure as rail and there is no protection, and you know you have problem of insecurity. So government coming up to that and say, oh, we want to engage private security to man our rail line is a step in the right direction. Look at what happened in Kaduna Abuja Rail. Now, mind you, in the last 5 quarters, railway grew by 62.5% per annum. In fact, just last Q1 of 2022, 124%. And so you see that improvement in railway sector. And
right.
We are just crashing that improvement by some of the attack and all of that. So for me, it's a step in the right direction. And that sector has lost so much money. In fact, if you look at the estimate of GDP loss in that sector, is about 70 billion naira. For the 5 months that Kaduna, because that Kaduna is contributing about 50% of revenue, and a lot of businesses that are connected to that railway operation. So for me, it's a step in the right direction, and I think we can finance it.
We'll keep tracking to see how we can. That all helps our railway. Thank you so much, Clement Igbanugo, economist, financial derivatives company. It was great having your perspective on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.